and you will kill plants several times, just like I did, right? These plants right here are dead. Hey guys, and welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and urban homesteading. Today I'm going to show you all of the transplants that I planted out in the garden over the weekend. I did film it, but the audio did not turn out great, so I am refilming it so you guys can see all of the little transplants and all the little seedlings that went into the garden. Now I am also going to talk to you about some of the problems I'm having. I might need to make a few adjustments here so that all my plants don't die. Okay, so in this bed we have zucchini, yellow squash, zucchini, yellow squash. They're actually doing pretty well. You can see a whole bunch of new growth on them over here. All of that is new growth. And then you can see they each have a drip line right next to the actual base of the plant. So those seem to be doing pretty well. Over here I have some tomatoes. Now these are my Roma tomatoes. They seem to be doing pretty well also. Now the big change that I made this season was to install this drip line. So a note about this, I originally installed just like black lining thinking that you could just puncture holes in it, but that's actually not the case. You need these little emitters, right? And so these have holes in them, but they also have like this little emitter inside the piping, so you actually do need that, because if not it's going to be very inconsistent. So the drip line has been a big change for me this season. I'm used to watering all my plants manually every single day, every morning, every night. I come out here and water when needed. That has been the biggest change so far. I definitely thought it was going to be much less of a headache, but I think there's maybe just some adjustments I need to make to it. What's happening right now is that because the raised bed soil is not very like heavy on compost, it does have a lot of compost in it, but it also has a lot of peat moss. The raised bed drippers, the emitters, they're dripping here, and then the water is expanding out to maybe around 3 inches or so, and it's not getting to the rest of the roots of the plants where they need it. So in some cases they're spaced a little bit closer together, so that seems to be a saving grace, but a lot of the seedlings are not getting as much water as I would have hoped, and running the drip line longer is really not going to help it, because it's just putting that water in one spot and it's not spreading it out like it's supposed to. So I'm probably gonna go back today to the hardware store and get like one of those little bubblers or something that it sprays it, more of like a sprinkler head that you stake inside the box. Hopefully that will help it. Once the roots of the plants are much bigger, then that drip line will work just fine, because the water will gravitate towards the roots, because the roots will be much more spread out. So that's definitely a learning curve. Some of my seedlings did not make it through the night last night, and that's actually one of the reasons why I always plant out more than I need. So I knew that there was a chance, like this learning curve, a chance that things were not going to go exactly how I have it in my head. So I planted out significantly more, and I have extra seeds just in case. But yeah, let me show you the rest of what's going on. Alright, over here you have the Swiss chard. Now these were significantly greener when I planted them in. You can see a lot of them over here are wilting, right? These little leaves here are part of it. This is not doing so great. So I think that's also one of the reasons. Now this line was not as doubled up before. Right now you can see the drip line is kind of like right next to each of the plants, or most of them, maybe not this one, and you can see that that one died, but it's near most of them. Now this drip line was originally supposed to be for that side of the bed, and then this drip line was supposed to be only for that side of the bed. Now I planted the Swiss chard kind of in the middle of the bed here, you can see, so I ended up putting them all in the middle of those lines. Now I'm not sure what's gonna happen when I need those drip lines for either side, because currently there's nothing planted over there. So that's really one of the reasons why I'm considering getting a bubbler head, so I can kind of put it where the smaller plants need more of like that sprinkler head system. My cucumber plants seem to be doing pretty well. I think their root system is probably a little bit more spread out, so they seem like they're not wilting as much. Now they're not really large enough to reach the trellisy part up here yet, which is why they're kind of just propped over, but they'll start trellising and they'll be just fine. And then the pepper plants seem to be doing pretty well, even though like this one back here isn't getting as much water. They seem like they're doing pretty well for the meantime. And over here you can see this one actually has started trellising all on its own. Okay, so another thing that I actually did not take into account, and maybe I should have, maybe this is like a rookie mistake with drip irrigation, but one thing that I did not take into account is the fact that I planted some seedlings, right? And then I also planted out some direct sown seeds, right? I planted out my parsley, my basil, I think a few other things. Oh, the arugula and the kale were all direct sown. Now, that means that the top level of the soil needs to be damp so that it comes into contact with seeds and they can germinate. With drip irrigation, the top level of the soil is really not damp. It's like damp only in one spot, and then theoretically underneath the soil it kind of like spreads out like that. But for right now, I needed the top level of the soil to be wet. So what I'm having to do is still come in and spray, like the mister spray on the hose setting, all of the top layer of where I planted out those seeds. So that was definitely a mistake on my part. I did not expect to have to do that, and I'm really not sure how to fix that besides putting in a sprinkler head or something like that, because that's really gonna dry out all the seedlings. It's not gonna be good. So like here you can see, right, I put in the drip lines, and this is where I direct sowed a lot of arugula, and it's really not getting the water it needs to germinate all of these seedlings. Alright, so here I have some okra. It seems to be doing pretty well. I think it's mostly kind of curled up because it's morning time, because it was actually doing really well yesterday, even in the heat. And then I have my sweet peppers over here, and then some more okra on this side. You can tell this one is doing significantly better. Now these are my orange peach tomatoes. The majority of them are doing plenty fine, right? They are getting their water, and tomatoes are pretty hardy. I've never had a problem with tomatoes wilting unless it's extraordinarily hot outside. But for some reason, these two in the back, right? So we have 4 on either corner, and these two are not doing really well. Even though there's water getting at it right here, this one definitely shriveled up, and I don't really foresee that coming back. This one might pick up a little bit because it still has some leaves that are actually surviving, but yeah, this one I'm gonna have to replace. These two are doing really well, and they all have, I mean, this emitter right here is probably more of a distance than this one over here, but it seems like for some reason maybe the roots didn't take, or I'm not sure what happened. And then of course here I have my grape tomatoes, and they are actually in the same spot as I transplanted them out last year. I don't really love doing that, but just by coincidence that's how it happened. I didn't really think about it too much. This one here, the same thing. It's really kind of starting to wilt a little bit, even though the soil beneath it is wet, so maybe just in transplanting some of the roots got shocked. I'm not sure. These ones seem to be doing really well. Alright, so for anyone new to gardening, if you stumbled across this video and you're not sure what it means to transplant something out, it means to take a seedling, right, from a seed that you started in a container, in a cup, in my case red Solo cups, and you take that seedling and you remove it from the container and you plant it directly in the ground, you water it in, and then you allow the roots to grow more because it's not being contained by that specific container. Now, I always transplant my seedlings out maybe about a month after I direct sow them in the little cups. Some plants need to be direct sown, some plants will survive the transplanting. Now, for the most part, I like to transplant anything that can be transplanted, anything that the root system has a strong enough survivability rate that it is going to be okay going into the garden after I remove it from the cup. So I really like to plant things ahead of time and then transplant them into the garden instead of direct sowing. Now, in certain circumstances, direct sowing is perfect, right? Like with basil, arugula, because the seeds are so small that it would take forever to plant 1 seed per container, right? Or even a couple seeds per container. In that case, you can just plant out, direct sow a whole bunch of arugula plants in almost no time, and it works out just fine, because if one of those plants doesn't survive, the other 1,000 of them will inevitably take over and survive. The reason I like to plant seedlings first when it comes to like major crops, right, like cucumbers, tomatoes, eggplants, things like that, is because then I can pick the best one. Not all of the seeds will germinate at the same rate, not all of them will be as strong, not all of them will even survive, right? So if you have, 3 tomato plants that you put in this one little container, you separate them out, and you notice that one of them has 3 leaves, the other one only has 1 leaf, right? Or one of them, the stem is much thicker, or one of them, just seems to be a little bit more yellow, right? For whatever the case is, I can take the best seedling, separate that out, and then transplant it into the garden, and that one is going to have the highest chance of survival and ultimately the highest chance of giving me what I want, which is in this case fruits and vegetables. So that's why I like to start seeds in containers first and then be able to transplant them out. Now some things you can't do that with, or rather you shouldn't. You can probably get away with the majority of things, planting them out and then transplanting them into the garden, but a lot of things have very delicate root system. Things like root crops, they don't transplant very well, so you're going to have a higher mortality rate, if you want to call it that, than with other crops. Like tomatoes transplant very well. Usually mine seem to not be liking this new drip system, but other than that, I've never had a problem with tomatoes, and hopefully I'll be fixing that. So I just really like transplanting out everything that I can. Now things like okra, for some reason, they don't transplant out very well, so I will be direct sowing those, and then a few other things that I have here just get direct sown all the time. So let's talk about soil amendments. When I transplant out my seedlings, I have already put in a whole heap of compost, right, for an inch or two to top off the garden beds. When I rip out the other plants, I put in my compost and let that settle for a couple days. Now, when I'm actually transplanting out my seedlings, the way I like to do it is I will take a little bit of blood marrow and bone marrow, probably like a little handful, right, like a tiny little handful, maybe a tablespoon or 2. I will mix in the blood and bone meal, and then I will just kind of move around the dirt a little bit so it gets like in there, and then I'll put the transplant directly in the hole and close it up. Now I know that you can take the entire bag of blood and bone meal or whatever your amendment is going to be and just mix it all over the bed. I don't know, I've always done it where I just put it in the little hole, or I'll top dress with my fertilizer or my amendments. I just like to do it like that because I have a little bit more control over which plants are getting that amendment, right? So I have had bad experiences in the past where I give one type of plant too much of this amendment, and then it just completely fried, but I gave another plant the exact same amount and it thrived and did super well. So I like to just be able to spot treat the plants with the amendments, except for compost, because of course compost goes in the entire garden. But as far as fertilizers go, that's the way I like to do it. I'll dig the hole, put in the fertilizer, mix it around a little bit, and then put in my transplant. So next steps for my garden would be to fix the irrigation problem. I will probably be going over to Home Depot today and getting some like sprinkler systems to add to the line, right? The little bubbler things that you can adjust the head and adjust how far they're actually spraying, the ones that go like that instead of just a drip line. So I'll be doing that just to make sure that the plants are actually getting water, and to prevent me from having to come out here and manually water, because that's the reason I got this drip line, right? This is the reason I put in this irrigation system. That will be my next project to try and troubleshoot. I have been gardening for a while, right? This is the first time I've used drip irrigation system, but you will make mistakes as a gardener. There is nothing that you're going to get 100% right all the time. You can get a few things right most of the time. You can get some things completely wrong 1,000 times over. But you will have to have a learning curve on everything, right? Gardening is going to be an adventure. It's going to be an interesting ride, and you will kill plants several times, just like I did, right? These plants right here are dead. So you will have to get used to the learning curve and make sure that you're okay with that. But then at the end of the day, when you step back and you look at your garden and the things that you grew and the harvest that you're able to get from that, it's always worth it. It always pays off, even with a very steep learning curve sometimes. So I'll be taking that as a lesson learned for my own garden this season, very early on in the season actually. But thanks so much for following along. If you did like this video, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to like and subscribe for more urban gardening and homesteading content. Thanks.